My name is Bob Skalstad. I grew up in Baltimore, what is commonly known today as Federal Hill. My family came from Baltimore. My family tree really fits a lot of different areas. My dad was a Baltimorean. My mom was actually from the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And the significance of that is the Eastern Shore and the Western Shore are completely different environments. And this started many years ago. There's a saying about Maryland that Maryland is a miniature of America. Because in Maryland, there's everything from the mountains area of Western Maryland to the beach area in Ocean City, where I live. What makes it unique is that it covers cosmopolitan areas like Baltimore and DC to small cities like Annapolis and Chestertown and Easton. And many of them are colonial. They began during the colonial period when Maryland was first founded. Maryland really began as an English colony, but was heavily influenced by religious freedom. Lord Baltimore, the founder of Maryland, wanted a place for Catholics to get religious freedom. Ironically, Catholics are a minority in the state. Protestants were very popular during that period, and even during all the way up until the late 1800s, Catholics were still persecuted in Maryland. They were not treated very well. I happen to be a Catholic. It's only one of the reasons I know. I went to a Catholic high school. I grew up in Baltimore. My family came from very meager backgrounds. My mom started as a clerk working in factories with companies around the area. My dad was a longshoreman who became a policeman, who became an entrepreneur. And I think that's probably where I get my entrepreneurial spirit is from my mom and dad. They both were very entrepreneurial. They got into the restaurant business and had some real good success. Mom came from the Eastern Shore on a little island her family grew up on called Hooper's Island, which was a small island in the Chesapeake Bay. Maryland is evolutionary. It's grown and changed and evolved with the times. It really was, when it first was founded, really was more of an offshoot of Virginia. If you look at where the population started, Jamestown and Williamsburg were really big areas of where the populations were. And a lot of the people who lived in the Virginia side, in order to get land, transitioned across the Chesapeake Bay to the Maryland side, and that began the growth of that area. That area of the Eastern Shore was heavily influenced by Native Americans. The Nanticoke tribe was one of the most popular in those areas. The differentiation between the Eastern Shore and the Western Shore is the Chesapeake Bay, which runs right up through the middle of the state. The Eastern Shore was very much an agricultural environment, where the Western Shore was more of a business and more populous area. And again, that evolved, where for a long time, Baltimore was a port, and a significant port, still is a significant port. But in the early days of colonial times, it was an area where it was strategically located in the center, in the mid-Atlantic. So it was just about equidistant from the most populous areas to the least. And it could transition for importation, because it was easier to stop in Baltimore than it was to transfer all the way to New York. And so the harbor in Baltimore became a very important economic area for the country. During the World Wars, it became a very important asset for shipbuilding. Shipbuilding has always been a huge component to Maryland. And it really started on the Eastern Shore, the more agricultural area. A lot of the people who lived in Virginia were tobacco growers. The second biggest crop at the time was the seafood industry. And that was where the Eastern Shore really became the dominant component because it supplied most of the seafood that went to the more urban areas on the Western Shore. There's always been a dividing line. It's always been the Chesapeake Bay. I remember coming down here when I was younger in business, and I always chuckled about this one bumper sticker that I saw that said, "Life does not exist west of the Bay Bridge." People, once you come to the Eastern Shore, people don't want to go back to the Western Shore. The environment is completely different. It's a slower pace. It's much more communicating and communal. Everyone looks for different things to help each other. So buy small, buy from local companies. That's real on the Eastern Shore. And it was interesting because it really was part of the seafood industry that started that cannery portion. You would have crab packing plants. You couldn't get crabs, blue crabs, from the bay to the major metropolitan cities fast enough before the crop would die because the refrigeration wasn't the same. So they would have places on the Eastern Shore that became factories. And basically it was crab packing plants where they would pick the crab meat, put it in containers, and then ship the containers to the Western Shore. As agriculture evolved and corn and soy and tomatoes and other crops became very dominant on the shore, they needed places to take that produce and fruit and vegetables and ship it to other parts of the country. What made that work was when the train systems came into the Eastern Shore. It took a long time for trains to get brought onto the shore, but once it did, it created a lot of small towns. Some don't even exist today, but they were built around train stops so that they would have a place to bring the produce, to bring the seafood, to bring all the agricultural products to be shipped out to other parts of the country, not just Maryland. It became an easy route for you to go from the Eastern Shore of Maryland to Philadelphia. It was actually easier in many ways to get there than it was to go to Baltimore. During the Revolutionary War, the Eastern Shore of Maryland was one of the main routes to go from Williamsburg in Virginia up across the bay and up the Eastern Shore to Philadelphia, where, as you know, the Constitution was written and ratified. So there were a lot of connections on those towns like Easton, St. Michael's, Salisbury, totally different. I'll talk about that in a second. Chestertown, Centerville, were all towns were on the route that took you from the Eastern Shore, southern Eastern Shore, up through and into the more cosmopolitan areas during the Revolutionary War of New York, Philadelphia, Boston. Salisbury was a product of industry. It really became popular as an agricultural area for poultry. Poultry built Salisbury and is still very viable. Eastern Shore supplies a tremendous amount of poultry to the entire country. And that became part of that evolution of business. Shipbuilding really got its start on the Eastern Shore. And the reason was all the little rivers and tributaries are unique to the bay. Further north you go, the more fresh water flows into the bay. The more south you go, the more it's influenced by the ocean and the salt water that comes into the bay, which is really a benefit to the Eastern Shore of Maryland and Virginia, because the crab crop is really dependent on the salinity of the water. It needs to be brackish, and depending on when you are in what part of the summer will depend on how good the crabs are. And it begins down in an area, down at the mouth of the bay, and transitions all the way up the bay. think I was blessed in having gone to an outstanding high school that probably had the greatest effect of my life. It changed who I was as a person, who I was becoming. It was an all-boys Catholic high school called Cardinal Gibbons High School. It's no longer in existence. It was closed a few years ago. It created values and an education that I used the things that I learned then to help me today. It helped me create my career. The second thing that I think influenced me the most was growing up in a family that was blue collar. It taught me values of hard work. You know, my mom used to have a great saying. She said, you can go a long way with good manners. And good manners don't cost a penny. And I've instilled that in my kids and my grandkids. It was instilled in me. My family, you know, my grandfather came from Norway. My grandmother was an immigrant. On my father's side, my mother's side, they were all from the Eastern Shore. Interesting is that it's come full circle. When my mom and dad retired to the Eastern Shore, they lived in a little area called Cook's Point, just south of Cambridge. And they opened a restaurant in Cambridge on Race Street called Whitey's. And it was just a breakfast and lunch kind of a place, but it became the spot, because the county seat was in Cambridge at the time for Dorchester County. And everybody would go in the morning and have their coffee. There'd be lawyers and judges and, you know, all the politicians would be in there. And I remember when they opened my mom's restaurant, and my mother and my aunt were the ones running it. And the newspaper banner said, "Pearls, girls, come home." My great-grandmother was Pearl, and she was a Willie. And you can't throw a stone on the Eastern Shore without hitting a Willie. So it was part of that whole uniqueness to the Eastern Shore that my family were part of. Our families intertwined with a lot of the known families here on the Eastern Shore, the Perdues, the Phillips family. You know, we remember when the Phillips family opened their first place in Ocean City.
Seafood restaurant.
And it wasn't a seafood restaurant.
No.
It was a crab carryout. You had to call ahead, landline, and order how many crabs you wanted, and then bring them in. There was no restaurant. It was just a shack, which eventually became a restaurant, but same location. The Phillips family, my mom as a kid worked at the crab packing plant, the Phillips crab packing plant on Hoper's Island, and during the summers. And my mom would tell the story that her and her sister would go there during the summers, and they worked and they got paid by the pound. So the amount of crab meat that they picked and put into a can, however many cans they made, that's how much they got paid. But she would tell the story that she didn't make much because she would eat a little, pick a little, eat a little, and pick a little. I was born and raised and grew up in Maryland, and I've always had a pride in what we did. And it was during an era when Baltimore and Maryland pride was very big. The Baltimore Colts were icons. The Orioles were world champions. The Colts were world champions. And that defined a lot of the city and the state, but mostly the city of Baltimore, where I grew up. I moved away for work to Florida. I lived in Florida for 26 years. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I moved back. And I could have moved anywhere because I had retired, semi-retired. And Maryland, I just miss. I miss the food. I miss the people. I miss the environment. I've traveled all over the world. I've seen a lot and driven boats and swam in a lot of body of waters from Pacific, Atlantic, Mediterranean, rivers, lakes, and still, in my opinion, Chesapeake Bay is the most beautiful body of water I've ever been on.
Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.